Most people don't feel lost all at once. It doesn't arrive as panic or collapse. It arrives quietly, disguised as routine. At first, everything looks fine. There's a schedule, there's effort, there's movement, and movement feels like proof. When days are full, questions stay silent. You wake up, you do what expected, you get tired. That tiredness feels earned, so it feels honest. This is how misalignment hides, not through chaos, but through structure. People rarely ask whether their direction still makes sense. They ask how to become stronger inside it, how to endure longer, how to optimize something that stopped working years ago. Effort becomes a shield. As long as you're trying, you don't have to question where you're going. And questioning direction is uncomfortable for a reason. It forces you to look backward without nostalgia. To admit that time was invested in something that didn't grow with you. That energy was spent maintaining a version of life that no longer responds. That admission feels heavier than failure. Failure is dramatic. It gives closure. Misalignment doesn't. Misalignment stretches time. You don't fall, you linger. You don't crash, you repeat. This is why so many people describe their lives as fine, but feel strangely absent inside them. Nothing is wrong enough to escape. Nothing is right enough to stay. So they stay busy. Busyness creates momentum without direction. It fills space. It delays stillness. Stillness is dangerous because it reveals patterns. And patterns expose truths effort keeps hidden. You begin to notice that progress resets every morning. That yesterday's work doesn't carry forward. That motion exists, but accumulation doesn't. At this point, most people assume the problem is energy. They think they need motivation, or discipline, or rest. Rarely do they consider that the problem might be alignment. Because alignment doesn't ask how hard you're working. It asks whether the work is still connected to who you are becoming. And that question has consequences. Changing direction doesn't just change the future. It reframes the past. It forces you to see certain sacrifices as unnecessary, certain struggles as avoidable, certain achievements as irrelevant. That's why effort is easier to protect than direction. Effort preserves meaning. Direction threatens it. So people keep moving. They refine systems that shouldn't exist anymore. They improve routines designed for a different version of themselves. They call it consistency when it's really preservation. This is how lives become heavy without breaking. Nothing collapses. Nothing explodes. Things simply stop evolving. And when evolution stops, effort turns into maintenance. Maintenance of habits. Maintenance of roles. Maintenance of expectations. The world praises this. It rewards reliability. It admires endurance. But endurance without alignment slowly empties purpose from action. Most people don't fail because they're weak. They fail because they mistake movement for meaning. They believe that staying busy is safer than stopping long enough to ask where all this is going. And in doing so, they trade clarity for comfort. In Part 2, we'll talk about what happens when movement finally slows, when effort can no longer hide misalignment, and why stillness, uncomfortable as it is, becomes the only place where direction can be recovered. Stillness usually arrives uninvited, not as peace, but as friction. It shows up when effort stops working the way it used to, when routines feel heavier than before, when productivity no longer creates relief. This is the moment most people try to escape. They add more structure, more systems, more rules, anything to avoid stopping, because stopping removes the noise. And without noise, there's nowhere to hide. Stillness exposes a gap between who you are and what you're doing. Not dramatically. Quietly, you begin to notice that your energy doesn't return after rest. That motivation comes and goes without changing anything. that the problem isn't exhaustion, it's resistance. This resistance isn't against work. It's against direction. When effort aligns with growth, it feels expansive. When it doesn't, it feels compressive. You're not tired, you're constrained. Most people misread the signal. They interpret resistance as weakness. They assume something is wrong with their discipline. So they push harder into a direction that already stopped responding. Stillness asks a different question. Not how do I fix this, but what am I maintaining that no longer needs to exist? That question is uncomfortable because it destabilizes identity. If a role disappears, who are you without it? If a routine dissolves, what replaces it? So people cling to structure even when it costs them clarity. But clarity only appears when movement slows enough to observe. In stillness, patterns become visible. You see which efforts compound and which reset, which actions move something forward, and which merely sustain appearance. This is where direction quietly re-enters the picture, not as a grand decision, not as a dramatic pivot, but as a small internal alignment. You start noticing what feels lighter instead of heavier, what carries forward instead of starting over, what creates momentum without forcing it. Direction rarely announces itself loudly. It reveals itself through reduced friction. Things don't suddenly become easy. They become coherent. Effort starts to stack instead of scatter. Progress feels cumulative rather than repetitive. This is how real change begins, not with intensity, but with accuracy. Accuracy doesn't demand constant energy. It conserves it. Most people never experience this shift because they never allow stillness long enough to listen. They confuse silence with stagnation. They mistake absence of motion for absence of value. But stillness is not the opposite of progress. Misalignment is. Stillness is a space where direction recalibrates, where unnecessary effort falls away, where movement regains meaning. This doesn't require abandoning everything. It requires questioning selectively. Not what should I add, but what can I stop sustaining? Not how do I push through this, but why am I pushing here at all? Direction is not found by effort alone. It's revealed when effort stops being used as camouflage. Most lives don't need reinvention. They need realignment. And realignment begins the moment you stop using movement to avoid truth. When stillness is no longer feared, direction quietly returns, not as urgency, not as noise, but as a sense that your effort finally belongs where it's going.